and welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. All right, so this week for our individual episode, we're going to go back to talking about leadership models. And if you remember, about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the transactional leadership model, I mentioned that it was first thought of as being opposite to the transformational leadership model, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I mentioned that the transformational leadership was sometimes opposite to the transactional leadership model, but now it's really better thought of as complementary. So the transformational and the transactional leadership model are thought of as to be more complementary leadership models. In fact, Bernard Bass, who was one of the great leadership researchers and who also extended the work of Burns, wrote extensively on transformational leadership, and he agrees that transformational and transactional leadership were not opposites of a single dimension, but rather multidimensional. So now, if you remember, transactional leadership focuses on the carrot and the stick approach. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago, and if you haven't heard that, I suggest that you go back and listen to that. It's a really good episode. So, transactional leadership model focuses on the carrot and stick approach, where you do your work well, as prescribed by your leader, and you get paid. And if you don't do your work well, you don't get paid and you actually get punished. Now, transformational leadership, however, is more about motivating your employees or your followers, really encouraging them to do more than what was intended in that transactional style. And sometimes more than what employees believe is possible, which will result in change. So, not surprisingly, transformational leadership is really defined by its ability to cause change in people, in teams, and groups, in societies, and culture as a whole. It's really characterized by leaders who can encourage, inspire, motivate employees to engage and create meaningful change. In fact, transformational leadership looks to higher values and is often used by leaders to challenge employees and followers to strive for and achieve that meaningful and valuable positive change in their lives or in the workplace. Now, Burns, who, if you remember, was also influential in advancing the transactional model, defines a transforming leader as someone who raises their followers' awareness of the importance of higher values and motivates those employees or their followers' concerns from security and belonging to achievement and self-actualization, which are higher order desires, by moving them beyond their self-interest to be more concerned about their groups, their teams, their organization, their culture, their societies. So really thinking more beyond themselves. And that's really characteristic of transformational leaders. Transformational leaders elevate others' level of maturity, of concern for others and the organization around them. They act as role models and they get others to follow their example. Now, to do this well, research has actually shown that there are 4 factors that make up the behaviors and the attitudes of transformational leaders. The first one is a charismatic leader or someone who has charismatic influence. Now, there are many definitions of charisma as it pertains to leadership, but for our purposes, it's really someone who is magnetic, who is thought of as a radical innovator sometimes, someone who their employees admire or loyal to and is trusted with unquestionable obedience and acceptance. It's important to note here that while charismatic leader can be used for good or bad, so if you think about bad, we're talking about Hitler, Stalin, Mao, it's only one of the elements of necessity for the transformational leader, which when we talk about the transformational leader is in this broader sense aims towards the achievement of higher positive ideals. So a charismatic leader can be transformational, but does not necessarily have to be transformational in their aspirationals. The next one is that inspirational motivation. And here we're talking about someone who challenges their employees through the use of challenging objectives and goals that are aligned to a larger sense of a mission, really expressing those vivid goals that their employees want to achieve and instilling the belief that those goals and objectives can actually indeed be achieved, thereby really stimulating enthusiasm within the employees. The next one is intellectual stimulation. Now, this one's really interesting because we're talking about a leader who has the ability to think differently about solving problems. But really, the emphasis here is not just the leader's ability to do so, it's about the leader's ability to get others to do so. And here comes that link to the thinking radically and the charismatic influence. And great examples of this are Presidents Kennedy and Roosevelt, whose strengths really wasn't getting others to think intelligently and differently about problem solving, essentially stimulating that intellect of others. And you'll note here that something that's common with all of this is communication skills, right? In order to be able to be inspirational, charismatic, stimulate intellect, you really have to have good communication skills because that's really important to getting people to think beyond their problems and think more towards solutions. Now, the last one of these four is that level of individual consideration here. These leaders were able to make you feel like had a personal coach and mentor. It felt like they were speaking specifically to you for the purposes of helping you reach your higher potential. So, where do transformational leaders shine? Well, clearly, when there's a change that's needed. It's in the name, transformational. And this is opposite to the transactional leader who really thrive when the status quo needs to be maintained. Transformational leaders are leaders that can challenge their people to take ownership of their lives and their work, to take ownership of their specific tasks and activities. They encourage people to come up with new ways of accomplishing tasks and solving problems. That's where that intellectual stimulation role comes into play. Transformation leaders are also individuals who have strong personalities. That charisma is essential to transformation and inspiration. Think of Martin Luther King. Think of Gandhi. These are individuals that people would follow to the ends of the earth. They were able to inspire generational cultural change. Now, a transactional leader also uses various components to help them lead. And I want to talk about just a couple of those. The first one is something called contingent reward. And with this, the leader works with employees to get an agreement on what needs to be done with the promise of reward when the task is accomplished. So think of Martin Luther King, who we mentioned earlier. The goal there, the reward for the people that followed Dr. King was equal rights, right? Achieving equal rights for everybody. Think of Gandhi in India. And again, the reward there that there was general agreement on was justice and independence from the British. Bill Gates, who we talked about, was initially a transactional leader, but later on changed to be a transformational leader. And he made Microsoft one of the best rated places to work for employees and also helped many of his employees become multimillionaires. So in the business setting, a transformational leader can really be essential for helping you achieve that business success where organizational transformation is needed. A transformation leader can help you change the culture of the organization, change the way in which people think about the way in which they work, really help to motivate them towards that larger organizational goal, help them change their focus from individual success to organizational success and financial success for the organization. The other one that we want to talk about is management by exception, which is basically monitoring and taking corrective action to help the employees stay on track. And I think this is really important because what we're saying here is that it's not just about inspiring, it's not just about the charisma, it's also about supporting as needed. Now, research has shown that transformation leadership is actually more effective than just transactional leadership. So we can really look at transformational leadership as that next layer of effective leadership that's needed to be overlaid on transactional leadership if you want to have a really effective leadership, especially in this time that we're in right now. And this is because change is constant with all the turmoil that businesses and organizations are experiencing due to the environment that we're in. Leaders have an advantage if they're able to gain the commitment and loyalty of their employees. If they can get employees to take ownership, if they can get employees to think outside the box and put the organization over themselves. To be clear, there is nothing wrong with transactional leadership. It has its place, and we've already discussed that. And in fact, for most leaders, it's not one versus the other. Leaders can display various traits of both styles and can even excel in both styles. One style, transformational, transactional, does not preclude the other. They should really be thought of as complementary styles. Okay, so again, a lot of very interesting information here about transformational leadership and how it compares and complements transactional leadership. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you'll join us again.